My placenta wouldn't come out because of all the trauma. So the OB got really impatient and she pulled really hard on the umbilical cord. And I could feel the suction and everybody heard the pop in the room. And I thought, like, I'm going to end up in the OR with a hemorrhage here and no uterus.
Hi, I'm Kayla Heater, follower of Jesus, wife and mother of 5 children, Christian childbirth educator and doula, and your host of the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, where we share God-centered birth stories, evidence-based birth education, and our pursuit of surrendering our birth plans to God. Let's get started. Hey everyone, happy Monday, or I always forget it's not Monday for everybody listening to this, but happy week. I hope you are having a beautiful week. If you are anywhere near where I am in the triad of North Carolina, it has been gorgeous. We have had spring-like weather, upper 60s. It's supposed to get to like 70 something tomorrow. Sunshine, beautiful. So weird. But I'm grateful, if it's not going to be snowing, it might as well not be cold, in my opinion. So it's been great. Extra time outside. It's been wonderful just for the kids. Cause man, a couple weeks ago when we had like the super cold snap and it was super, super like bitter cold every day, we were only outside like, I don't know, an hour a day max. And it just, whew, you go a little stir crazy, a little cabin feverish when you're inside with 5 kids all day. So the beautiful weather has been incredible. Speaking of spring-like weather, our spring childbirth class is quickly approaching. I already have 2 couples signed up, looking for some more couples to take our spring childbirth class here in person. And that is for summer due dates. So if you are due in June, July, or August, even the end of May, maybe, or early September. But for those summer due dates, we are looking for some more couples to join our class. We are actually going to start the last Sunday in March, so March 30th, and then we'll go through April except for Easter. So we're not going to meet on Easter Sunday, which is the 20th, which will take us to the first Sunday in May. So it's technically March 30th through May 4th, every Sunday evening, except for Easter. So if you or somebody you know is looking for a class, we would absolutely love, love, love to have you in our class. It is fully comprehensive, fully Christian. I do not know of another in-person class here in the Triad that is this thorough, I promise you, and also Christian. So please let me know, send me a message, or, share this with somebody else who you think might be interested in the class. We would absolutely love to have them. All right, let's jump into this week's episode. Time after time after time after time, Melissa had fallen prey to the hands of the hospital system in Canada and their complete overmanagement of the birthing process, as well as their complete lack of humanity when it comes to such a sacred event. Then, thinking having a home birth with midwives would be worlds better, she was still left fighting for herself every step of the way through her pregnancy, labor, and postpartum. Then she experienced a series of losses that nobody should have to bear. And instead of getting the sympathy and respect she more than deserved, she was simply seen as a case to be handled and a box to be checked when she was going through one of the most gut-wrenching experiences of her life. Finally, for her 8th live birth, she desired to have the empowered, faith-led, free birth of her dreams, if only God would allow it. Well, welcome to another episode of Surrendered Birth Stories. I am your host, Kayla Heater, and I have Melissa with me today. Melissa, why don't you just take a moment and introduce yourself and tell us about your family and your life and help us to get to know who we're talking to.
Sure. So my name is Melissa Allen. I am a mom of 14. Um, 8 children are with us, and 7 are in God's garden. I homeschool, we homestead, and I am a traditional birth companion that support moms who want to birth outside the system with confidence and fearlessly.
Oh, that's exciting. And where do you live?
We are in Canada, in New Brunswick.
Oh, cool. My sister just went to Canada for her honeymoon.
Oh,
Yeah, they had a great time. They'd never been. I've actually never been either. All right. So let's take it all the way back to your first pregnancy. So tell us that story. Start there. What was it like getting pregnant for the first time?
yeah. So my husband and I, we pretty well got pregnant within a few months of getting married. I was an RN at the time. So I had been through clinicals where you go through each section of rotations, is what they call it, like whether it's maternity or psych, or so you see a little bit of what it's like in the hospital before you decide where you kind of want to work. I was working as an oncology nurse, which is cancer. And so I had been through the maternity rotation, and I remember going through that rotation and thinking something is off. Um, it didn't seem right to me. I remember women that were just, it seemed like they were kind of strapped down and not able to move, and really scared and unsure. And even though I had been through nursing, I just felt like there was something in me that it just didn't seem natural what was going on. And so at the time, all I knew was hospital birthing since that's what I came from. So I was determined to have like a natural hospital birth. So I did all the things, went to the OBs and did all the testing that I was supposed to do because, that's what you do when you do that. You want to be like the good little girl type thing, and passed all the tests. So I got the A-OK that just gonna wait till labor starts. No induction, nothing happened like that. So it was perfect. I did consent at 40 weeks because of fear mongering of the, pressuring, like, oh, well, you don't want to wait till 42. We can kind of strip your membranes and see if we can get things started, because if you go over, there's more possibility of a section, and, no mom wants to end up having surgery. So I consented. And I remember being in a lot of pain. It caused lots of cramping and pain for a couple of days and then nothing. And then the following day, my water broke. And I was really excited. I was like, oh, this is great. But I really wasn't having any contractions, just my water had broken. And so, you do what every first mom does, like, quick, ran to the hospital. Our water broke. My husband was like, nervously like packing last minute things, throwing things in the bag and stuff. So we got to the hospital, and sure enough, they agreed that my water had broken and no contractions. Like, I wasn't laboring at all. So they said to come back in the morning, and
Wait, they let you go home?
yeah, they did.
Okay, so no, that's amazing because that wouldn't happen in America. They would
Yes,
have held you in and put you on Pitocin.
which I thought was weird at the time because I remember thinking, like, well, you're technically, according to their policies, like, they don't want your water to be broken more than 12 hours. So that's why they suggested, well, morning. And if it doesn't happen any time during that time, then they would put me on Pitocin, which was the drug to get things going. So I came in the morning. I really wasn't doing much. They would start and stop, start and stop. It felt more like Braxton Hicks than anything.
Hmm.
They didn't actually end up putting me on Pitocin until the afternoon, which I was really surprised because it had been more than 12 hours. And of course, I had gotten checked a few times. But when they put me on the Pitocin, within a couple of hours, the pain was too intense to manage. They had given me morphine. It really, like, looking back on it at the time, like, it felt like I was in transition. Like, I was getting no relief between contractions, and I consented to the epidural. Then I had side effects from the epidural. I had that spinal type headache.
Mm.
My blood pressure was extremely high. They were throwing around the words preeclampsia. My placenta was starting to come out before she was.
Oh man, like an abruption?
Yeah, I was like full blown hives, and I was so sick, like to the fact that I was like throwing up like buckets, like basins.
Mm.
And my nurse was like telling me, like, she's like, "You're scaring me." And I'm pretty sure it was all a reaction to the epidural that was going on. And then I started having like super high fevers and the shaking to go with it. So I was thinking in my head, like, okay, now I have an infection going on. Anyways, I managed to avoid a section. I have no idea, other than by God's grace, lots of praying, lots of tears, and that labor. Of course, the epidural ended up prolonging the labor. So it was like over 24 hours. And then with the epidural, I pushed for two, and I couldn't feel anything. So it was all, directed from the nurse that was beside me looking at the monitor. Okay, there's a contraction coming on. Like I couldn't feel anything. Even when she turned it down, I still couldn't. So that was my first. And because of all that stuff, she ended up with her own infection and in the NICU for a week and lots of nursing and pumping around the clock, antibiotics. I was a mess. Like I came home and I had no idea what to do
Mm.
with this baby. And I remember being depressed and teary myself because I was like, what just happened? Going for
Yeah.
this natural birth and you come out like, what in the world? So yeah, that was my first birth. And it was amazing that I wanted to have more children after that.
Yeah.
She was kind of a rough baby too. And I think it was because of all the trauma and my own trauma and just I felt like I didn't know what to do with her. It was sad, really, the whole situation. And so by the time baby two came, I decided, yes, another hospital birth, because again, that's all I knew. And where I am in Canada, there was no registered midwives at the time because midwifery was illegal until 93. And then they brought it into Ontario. And then they slowly started legalizing it in different provinces. And New Brunswick was one of the last provinces. So midwifery didn't actually come until 2000 and I want to say 15 or 16.
Wow.
I mean, there was always kind of like that underground movement of unregistered midwives, but at the time, I had no idea about that.
So what year was your daughter born then, your first?
She was born in 2011.
Okay, so before midwifery had come. Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. So I had done hospital birthing with number two, three, four, five, and six. And the rest of them went better. Not nearly as traumatic, but they were still kind of interfered with. I don't want to say not nearly as traumatic because some of them were good and some of them were definitely not good after that. My son, he did well. He was number two, and I was able to birth him without any issues. I chose not to have the epidural, and that was kind of like my eye-opening experience of like, wow, like I can do this. Baby number three, he came a lot faster. I think he was born in 6 hours. No issues with him. He did have some meconium when they broke my waters, but he came out fairly quickly after that. So thankfully, no complications with that. Number four was when I experienced the fetal ejection reflex. I was birthing her, and my nurse told me to wait. And I said, I can't wait. Like, she's coming. She's literally coming. And she's like, well, you can't do it until the OB gets here. It's like, what? That was so odd to me. I'm like, you're a nurse, though. Like, isn't this part of your job? And she was literally screaming at me. And I was like, she's coming. Like, I can't do anything.
Right.
She almost ended up on the floor. The nurse just happened to be standing there as she was coming out.
Were you on the floor?
No, I wasn't on the floor. I was on the bed.
But nobody was like trying to catch her or anything?
No. No.
What about your husband? Was he like up by your head?
He was up by my head. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. No one was really paying attention to what was going on. Everybody was just kind of yelling at me, like, to stop. But I was like, I can't. Like,
Oh
and she's coming.
man.
I kept saying, like, she's coming.
So the nurse ended up
So,
swooping in and catching her then?
yeah, last minute, thankfully. Yeah.
Wow.
It's just, I know. I know. I just look back now and think, wow, it's definitely like God's grace that intervened at these times. Number five, she was a little more traumatic. The nurse had asked me if I wanted some fentanyl when I came in, and I felt like I needed something to take the edge off because my fear of the hospitals by that time was just too much, like just instant anxiety, and my contractions would always slow right down when I got there. So I said yes, and that was the only one I took. And when I was getting ready to push, I saw her pick up a dose of fentanyl and push it in the IV. And I was shaking my head no, because at the time I couldn't speak. I was pushing her out and she wasn't listening to me, but she was looking right at me when I was shaking my head no. And she's like, oh dear, like you just need a little bit to take the edge off while you're pushing. And I was like, no, but I couldn't speak. I was just
Yeah.
shaking my head. So she came out blue, not breathing. They had to give her Narcan. And when they did, they were giving her oxygen, like they were bagging her with the ambu bag, and they overinflated her lungs doing that. So she ended up with a hole in her lung and had to go to NICU. Thankfully, it was only for a few days, and my placenta wouldn't come out because of all the trauma. So the OB got really impatient and she pulled really hard on the umbilical cord. Yeah. And I could feel the suction and everybody heard the pop in the room. And I thought, like, I'm going to end up in the OR with a hemorrhage here and no uterus because of what was going on. But thankfully, that didn't happen. I don't know how. Again, it was just by God's grace that didn't happen. And then number five, again, no, that was number five. Number six was in the hospital, and he was a big baby. They did end up giving me Pitocin, even though I was in labor on my own to keep it going because he wasn't coming, and I tried the position changes and nothing was working. So I agreed, and of course, he was on a tight schedule, the OB. It's hard to say no when you're in labor, when all your hormones are kind of focusing on getting that baby out. And then, you know, they have a very good way of, I don't know, like talking to you to make it sound convincing, like, oh, yeah, like this, I should do this.
Yeah. Well, you're
Um,
also very vulnerable at that time. Like
yeah.
your hormones make you very submissive and you're not like in your complete sober state of mind, like biologically
Oh,
speaking.
no, and I think they take advantage of that um,
Oh, for
when you're in
sure.
there, for sure.
Did you guys have any doulas at any of your births, or was it always just you and your husband?
It was always me and my husband until I ended up having a birth with the midwives. Yeah.
Okay, so you switched to midwives. Which birth did you end up switching from OBs to midwives?
Number seven, when we finally had like a
Oh,
registered
oh,
midwife.
oh. Okay, gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha, gotcha. So
Yeah.
six still with an
So
OB.
six was hospital. He was a big baby. He was over 10 pounds. Like he was over the limit for the sugar limit type thing.
Oh, oh, oh,
Like
oh,
they have
the
that
blood sugar test.
yeah.
Yeah,
The policy is if your baby is between like above a certain weight, then they
or
have to go to
lower.
NICU because of the blood sugar being too low or whatever. So um I didn't get to hold him at all. Like they took him right away. Saw he was a big baby, brought
Just
him.
because he's big?
Hmm. I didn't get to do like any feeding, no colostrum, nothing. Just took him away.
Did they feed him?
Yes, they
Oh,
did.
man.
Yeah. So needless to say, I wasn't too happy with that, but his sugar was fine. But they still had to monitor him overnight just in case,
Ugh.
their policy. They had to have so many positives or above a certain number in order to make it okay to bring him out. But he was another one that my placenta didn't come. well, wonder why, right? I didn't get to hold my baby or anything. So that
Right.
was
You
kind
were
of traumatic.
disconnected right away.
Right. And this OB was a different one and he pulled on the cord again. Nothing came out. So he actually manually removed my placenta.
He stuck his hand up in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
He
how long
pulled it in pieces.
after he pulled it out in pieces?
Hmm.
Melissa,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. How long after the birth did he do that?
Oh, it was, I don't know, within a half hour anyways.
That's it? Only
Because he
30
was,
minutes?
yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
placentas can take a couple hours before they want to release.
Yes. Yeah, they do. Yeah, I had never seen my husband like so white before. Like I thought he was really good in births, but that was the birth that I thought he was going to pass out in. I was just in shock. Like I couldn't believe what was going on. I was like, "Oh my word. Like what?" And of course, like I had bleeding after, so they were
Oh,
hanging
yeah.
bags of Pitocin and so that was when I was like, "Okay, like I'm done. I am done." I said, and like I knew nothing about birthing unassisted, and I said, even if I don't get accepted by the midwives, like I'm done. Like that's it. I'm done trying to give the hospital a chance.
Yeah, you mean you're done with hospital birth, not done with having
Yeah,
babies.
no, no,
Okay.
because we've always wanted lots of children. We love our kids and love babies, and but yeah, I was definitely done with hospital birthing. That was it. So then number seven was with midwifery, my first experience with them. And again, like they were registered midwifery, so I didn't think I had to fight for my home birth with them, but I did. Anytime I had to test anything, it was always, well, if this comes back this way, then there's a chance you'll have to go to the OB. I'm thinking, oh, there's no chance I'm going to the OB. Or, well, we're not sure if you're going to have a home birth. Like it really depends on the end. Like nobody can guarantee that one way or another. Like I'm going to guarantee it because I'm having a home birth. Like I just am. Like all throughout it, it was a fight. And I found that even saying no to certain tests and things, every birth after I had researched more and more and more, dove deeper into the whys, and it was still a fight, which I thought that was really odd to me because like honestly it felt kind of deceptive because as a midwife, like that that's what you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be with women. I mean, an OB, I get it, they're a surgeon. That's what they do. But an OB that was or a midwife that was I was just kind of in shock. Like, really?
Yeah.
Wow, like I can't believe this. And I remember near the end of his pregnancy, he was coming in February, right? So like snowstorms up here. And there was a storm like a week before he came. And they're like, well, if he ends up coming in a snowstorm, we're not going. They're like, you have to go to the hospital. I said, if it's storming, there is no way that I'm going to the hospital either. Like, why would I risk my life? Like, I will have this baby at home. And they were really like fear mongering. Like, you can't do that. Like, what if something happens? And I said, what if nothing happens? What if everything goes right? And near the end, they were telling me you're going to end up being induced and if you go past 42 weeks. And so I agreed to multiple sweeps. I had never had so many sweeps in the end of a pregnancy before. And I remember the last sweep that I had, like breaking down crying. The midwife was like, "Oh, what's wrong?" And I was like, "I just want a home birth. Like, that's all I want." And she looked at me and she said, even if you have to birth in the hospital, it's not that bad. We'll make it like home. I said, no, it's not going to be like home. And I was just so teary and crying. And she just acted like it was, not a big deal. Like, it's
Mm.
okay. Like, it's not okay. Like, you have no idea. Like, and I think with just everything having to fight with them, like the whole time. So what happened with his was I went home because they told me I was exactly 42 weeks according to my date. And they had called the hospital and they had me booked for an induction the next day.
At like 42 plus one.
Yeah. And I told my husband, I'm like, I'm not going in. I'm not going in. So I decided to induce myself. I got some castor oil and I did the midwives screw a couple times. Horrible, awful.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happened, thankfully. And then I brought out my pump and I started pumping, and that broke my water. And thankfully, he was in somewhat of a good position, or else I can see now, like looking back, like, wow, those would have been a terrible thing to do. But I feel like as a mom who's desperate, your moms are willing to do anything to, if you really want to avoid a hospital birth and something traumatic, like they really will. So labor started like right away and it was intense.
Like right after your water broke.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had a doula. So I called her and asked her to come over for some pain relief. And things were picking up. And my plan in my mind was I was waiting to the last possible minute to call a midwifery, even to go unassisted and call them near the end when everything was done. But since I had a doula there, she was not for that. I didn't tell her the plan. She just kept saying, I think you should call midwifery. I think you should call midwifery. And I was like, no, just a little bit longer, just a little bit longer. So even then, like I still felt like I was fighting for her, like with her, right? On what I wanted.
Just not what you want to do during your labor.
No, no, it was still a fight. So I ended up calling. They came and I told them my water broke. And then they said the strangest thing to me. They're like, oh, like did the cord come out? I was like, what? What do you mean? I was like, no. Like, well, can you feel the cord up there? I was like, no. Like, are you not gonna tell me something? And they're like, oh well, does he feel like he's, dropped any? Because he hadn't dropped. And all my babies had dropped previously. And I was like, no. And then that was it. Okay. They're like, hey, well, we're on our way. So they showed up. And he was kind of how he was sitting, wasn't straight up. He was kind of a little bit angled like that. So when the midwife came, she during a contraction, she kind of like pushed him a little bit and he went head down, like immediately dropped like that. And so as soon as she did that, I was ready to push. I did have a birthing pool, so went in there to push him out, and he came out. We had his cord around his neck, but it was fine. We just unwrapped him, and placenta came out, no issues. But I agreed to a shot because, again, of the fear mongering with the midwifery, because they're like, oh, well, if something happens, like you're going in. If you end up having some sort of hemorrhaging or something and you don't agree to the shot, like we're taking you into the hospital.
So they wanted to give you a shot of Pitocin, like prophylactically, like just,
Yeah,
yeah.
just in case. Yeah. So I agreed because even though I had told them, like, I'm like, my hemorrhaging has always been due to the hospital. Like, I've never hemorrhaged on my own, like in the hospital. And I told them that in my birth stories, but it didn't matter. Like, it was more for their fear, their concern. And then they passed it on to me. So I was like, okay, well, I better do this, like, just in case. So I did that too. Thankfully, nothing happened. And honestly, afterwards, like I felt like it was a good birth, but when I had time to process it, I was really disappointed. I was like, wow, it's like just the whole journey and the fighting to get where I wanted to be. And it just, I don't know, it still felt like there was some sort of disconnect. It didn't feel like this amazing experience that I wanted to have. I didn't feel redemptive at all.
Yeah. Because you were having to fight for yourself the whole pregnancy and labor and after labor. Like the fight sounds like it never stopped.
No, no, it didn't. And I was just really, really disappointed
Hmm.
with everything, how it went.
So that was baby number 7.
That was baby number 7.
I know you said you had 7 babies in heaven.
Right.
Were those like throughout your other pregnancies, or when did that happen?
So I had early miscarriage between baby number 3 and 4. And then I had 6 consecutive losses after baby number 7. So this was going into COVID. 3 of them were early, and then 3 of them were second trimester.
Wow.
They definitely gutted me. So it was technically baby number 8, just at the beginning of when things started to go in lockdown in 2020, like when things started coming this way. So I was 14 weeks pregnant, and I was still choosing to go to midwifery, but just for the prenatals. I wasn't willing to let that go just yet. But my plan was to birth unassisted at home. No doula, just my husband and I. I was like, no, I'm done. But yeah, like I said, I wasn't quite done with the care.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I just was kind of like the last thing to go.
Yeah.
I had my first appointment. I asked them not to use a Doppler the first time. The second time I went in, they had asked, and I don't know. I just felt like I didn't know if something was off or not, but for some reason, part of me felt like I needed to have it done.
The Doppler.
Yeah, the Doppler. I noticed that around 12 weeks, my nausea was non-existent. And for me, I usually have nausea throughout off and on, but to kind of like stop, it was weird. And I just, I didn't feel as tired, and just a lot of other pregnancy symptoms were kind of not there. But I just found it odd. I didn't really put that it could be a miscarriage because, I was past that 12-week
That
mark.
window. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had went in and I said, yeah, yeah, let's do a Doppler. And she couldn't find anything. And she's like, oh, well, it's still early. And I said, I don't buy that.
Yeah. Not at 14 weeks.
No, I'm a small person anyways. And I've always, even at 8 weeks, like they've always been able to pick up the baby right away. And so she listened around and she's like, well, why don't we just get an ultrasound? We'll book it tomorrow. Because I was at the end of the day. And I just knew, I knew, there wasn't going to be any heartbeat. So I started crying and she was like, oh, no, no, like, I'm sure it's not anything. Like, the baby's fine. And I'm thinking in my head, how can you reassure that? Like, is this for your reassurance or for me? Like, it just felt really awkward. So it was actually my son's birthday. Wasn't much of a birthday when I came home and told my husband, since it was during COVID, no one was allowed to go to appointments with you and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so I had to go to ultrasound the next day by myself, which, was awful in and of itself. And they did the ultrasound, and sure enough, the tech was there. And I said, well, is there heartbeat? And she's like, I'm not allowed to say either way. Like, are you serious? I said, just let me know. Like, I'm sure you can tell whether there's a heartbeat or not, like on the screen. Anyway, she refused. And she's like, I got to go talk with the radiologist. I knew. Like, when obviously do you need to talk with a radiologist if I've never had that happen with any of the other,
Right.
pregnancies? They're usually like, oh, here's a picture, things look great. I'm just going to double check to make sure everything's okay. And then you can go. Like, that's usually how it goes. Like,
Yeah.
there was no picture, no, it was automatically like, well, I got to go. Like,
Yeah.
okay. So I knew.
So you knew. Yeah.
I knew. So the radiologist came in and he said, there is no heartbeat. And it was very cold, like just in how he approached it. And the radiologist was just, there was no feeling there, which seemed to make it worse. It's like this was just his job. Um, you know, that was just maybe a baby, maybe not a baby, depending on his definition of what a baby is. And then even the tech, I remember seeing like Kleenexes sitting there. I was crying and she wouldn't even offer me a Kleenex. I remember sitting there thinking, like, how awful is this? Like, I'm here without my husband because I'm not allowed because of your rules, and could this be any more isolating at all? And then they just said, well, go wait in the waiting room for the midwives to call you. I'm thinking, for what? Like, what do they need to say to me? So I called my husband while I was waiting and told him. Of course, he was devastated, and upset. And then I just waited for midwifery because I couldn't go home. I needed to take some time off. I think I ended up going to a park and just waiting there. So I got the call and, right away, oh, I'm sorry. Here's your options. You can wait it out, you can get a DNC, or you can take the pill, misoprostol. And I said, okay. I was like, well, I would really like to wait it out. No, no, you can't do that. I thought that was an option. Oh yeah, but your chances of infection and hemorrhage go way up. So, we don't really recommend that. So you should we should get you in with the OB to do a DNC or the pill. I said, I need to talk with my husband. And I said, and can I have like at least a week? Does this have to be done right now? He had died at 13 weeks. So it was only a week technically. And they're like, okay, but how about we just give you like 3 days and that's it. And then you can make your decision. Like it was really like pushy. Like I felt like it was like a sales call almost, right?
Yeah.
Um, so when I talked to my husband, we talked it over and we chose to do the misoprostol. I really wanted to do the waiting it out, but with my other kids and my husband, his work schedule, not knowing whether he would be around, and I had no other help at that time.
Yeah.
I didn't know what was going to happen. So we chose the misoprostol. I went to the OBs. That was scary in and of itself. They were really, really pushy and just really cold. They had their rote sayings, already. Like any questions, like da 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 da, and this da 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 da, like right, like memorized, right? Like how
Yeah.
you kind of feel when you go there. So I got the pill and took it. I can't remember the exact dose, but I took it, and then immediately after I took it, I just felt like I just did the worst thing in my life. Like I shouldn't have done this. I just felt instant guilt for doing this.
Why do you think you felt guilty?
Um, I don't know. I felt like I should have honored him more, I guess, just by waiting,
Yeah.
letting it happen naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I labored all night and it was definitely labor pains. I took lots of red raspberry leaf tea and nettles. I made some big infusions and drank those all through the night to help uh, with any sort of bleeding. And the next morning, it was about 8:30. I was sitting on the couch with the kids and I felt like a plop in my underwear. And I went to the bathroom and there he was.
Hmm.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. You don't need to apologize. This is really, really hard. But I'm really appreciative of your vulnerability and transparency and willingness to tell this story.
Thank you. Um, yeah, so the kids all got to hold him and meet him. And um, yeah, like you could tell he was a little boy and uh, we called our priest and he came over and called the funeral home. And they came and picked him up and we ended up having a burial within a few days after just to help. I had to, I think maybe it was a week roughly, just to help with my bleeding and stuff, just to make sure everything was okay
Yeah.
on my end. So that was that day. And then I had called midwifery and let them know. And they said, okay, just let us know if there's any bleeding that picks up and all that stuff. So the next day I thought I had delivered my placenta, but I didn't realize like how big it was supposed to be at 14 weeks. because it was like the shape of a grapefruit. I had like this grapefruit at the time. Thought it was my placenta, but it was a clot that came out. So I thought everything was good. The next day, I had a giant piece of placenta come out and my bleeding picked up. And I called midwifery because they had said, if anything changes or whatever, let us know. And I called them, and the midwife who answered said to me, okay, well, what do you want me to do about it? And I said, well, I was told that I was to call you if any bleeding or anything picked up. And she's like, yeah, well, you just go to the hospital. I was like, okay, thanks so much. Like, I had no idea what else to say. Um, Totally floored at the lack of care and concern.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't end up going in, like my bleeding subsided, but I did go in the following day for an ultrasound just to see what was going on. And sure enough, everything was, as far as my placenta, was still there. So I did have to go in and do a D&C. I didn't even bother calling midwifery and telling them any of that. I just was like, forget it, I'm
Yeah.
done with them as well, I guess. So midwifery ended up calling me like a couple of days later, and they're like, oh, like we got a report saying that you had like a D&C. Is everything okay? And I was like, well, no, like it's not okay. And I was talking about like grief and this is my baby and all that stuff. And they were talking about, physically, is everything fine physically? They didn't do any sort of check-ins after that. It was kind of like, okay, well, we're wrapped up with you, we're done with you, kind of thing. Like, good
Hmm.
luck.
Yeah. So impersonal.
Yeah, it was really impersonal. Um, so I ended up getting pregnant and having another baby, a little boy. Again, I went back with midwifery just for the care because I didn't think it was going to happen again, but it did. This time at 16 weeks, I still had pregnancy symptoms, but I don't know what it is. I just knew in my heart that he was gone. I had gone in and I had held off on the Doppler again, and they said, asked me at my 16-week appointment if I wanted to do a Doppler, and I said sure. And sure enough, there was no heartbeat, and I just started crying automatically. And they're like, "Okay, well, we're gonna get you in for ultrasound today, as soon as we can." So they booked one. I was there, and again, this was all still during COVID, so same thing, my husband wasn't allowed to go in and all that stuff. And sure enough, there was no heartbeat. And this time the fear mongering was, well, you're later, you can't take the pill at home. It's too dangerous and you can't do a D&C. And if you do expectant management, like waiting out, you're more likely to hemorrhage because you're farther along. Okay. So I chose to be induced at the hospital instead. And they said, okay, well, let us know what you decide, right? So I let them know. I remember being at the hospital and I got a call from midwifery and they're like, okay, like, so where yeah, I had called them and told them what I was doing. They said, okay, um, keep us updated or whatever. So I didn't know what that meant, but I remember being at the hospital, waiting for them to do the misoprostol. And
And your husband couldn't even come to the induction?
he was allowed to come for that.
Okay, good.
Was allowed to come for that. Yeah. Midwifery called me and they said, have you delivered your baby yet? And I was like, no, like I'm just at the hospital now. And they said, oh, okay. And that was it. And then they hung up. After this was all over with, I'd asked one of the midwives because she was doing some follow up blood work. And I said, do you guys not go to the hospital for moms that are induced for loss? And she's like, oh, no, we do. I said, then how come it didn't happen with me? And she's like, well, there was a miscommunication. No one could go at that time. We were really busy. Oh, okay. Thanks. So, yeah.
Mm.
So I ended up with an induction again with him, and he came, but I guess I blame the hospital on this again because I know the dose that I had at home was different than the dose in the hospital. because I think it was 5 pills at home, and then the hospital, I had way more than 5. They were in a big rush, they wanted to get him out, they're like, "Oh, yeah," and they checked me at one time, like, "Hey, great, you're dilating, I'm having a little bit of bleeding from the dilation, he's coming," kinda thing, right? But it wasn't fast enough for them, so they came back in and they're like, "We're just gonna give you, like, a couple more pills, just to keep you going." Like, okay, like, I didn't know anything at that time, so they gave me a couple of pills, and within, I don't know, a very, very short time, I started hemorrhaging. I was pouring blood. He came with it, and I really thought I was going to die. My blood pressure started dropping very fast. They had to hook up IV, get the fluids in. My husband, I mean, he was pretty upset. He thought I was going to die. He's like, "I've never seen you so white." Um, I was kind of like crashing basically very quickly. And the nurse looked at me and she's like, "We are not going to lose you. You're not going to die on my watch." I'm like, "Okay, that's really not reassuring."
Right, using those words, right.
Yeah, yeah. So they
Gosh.
hung some medication to help with the clotting, but the only thing that happened was, like, I was pouring out clots instead of actually stopping.
Yeah.
It took some time. I got some more fluids into me. My blood pressure was back up at that time. Things started to slow down. So the baby was born. I really didn't get to hold him right away because of everything that was going on. The OB came in and she looked at me and she said, "Okay, now we're going to get you to sit up and deliver your placenta." And I said, "What?" I was like, "I can't sit up." Like, I could barely form a sentence. Like, I was completely out of it. And the nurse looked at me and she's like, "You're going to sit up. The OB wants you to sit up." I was like, "I don't care." Basically, like, I can't. So they put the head of the bed up, and I had 4 nurses pick me up out of the bed and try and get me to stand at the side of the bed, and I almost fell on the floor. Like, what do you expect? And then the OB got really upset at me, and she's like, "Okay, great. Now we have to bring you down to a D&C and get your placenta out that way." Like, as though it was my fault. It's like, "Okay." Like, I was just everything with grief and how things were going. It was like, I don't know.
There's like no sensitivity. Yeah, no sympathy. No, oh my goodness. Gosh.
Yeah. So I had the DNC. I had to have a unit of blood, but even though I had the unit of blood, it still wasn't enough. It didn't get my blood up enough, but I didn't want any more, and they weren't even willing to give me any more anyways. So I went home. I had to work on getting my blood up naturally with some natural means. It took about a week, and I was just so angry at everything. I couldn't even grieve. I just remember being, yeah, angry at everyone just for what was going on. And yeah, a couple of days later, my bleeding picked up. I went back to the hospital and they didn't get it all. So I had to have another DNC.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I was just a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really rough.
Melissa, I'm so sorry. Like, this is just, I mean, the fact that you lost your babies in the first place is like tragic and traumatic and so sad all on its own. But to add the lack of respect and the lack of sympathy and the lack of actual care, like I kept thinking about, you would say, I ended up going back to midwifery for my care. And all I wanted to say was, it's not care. Like, they're not
No.
caring for you. There's no care in what they're doing. I'm s- I'm just so sorry. I'm so sorry that all of this has happened.
Yeah, I mean, looking back at it now, it's labeled prenatal care, but it's really not. You're just kind of on this conveyor belt, more or less, whether you're pregnant or whether you're not pregnant. They just can't help themselves. They can't wait for you to be done a pregnancy, whether it's a loss or whether it's not a loss. They're just always in this big rush,
Yeah.
to have their own timeline, even in death. Like, it's just, they have no respect for life, so they're not going to have any respect for death.
Mm.
You know, life is a miracle, and And even like there's so many unknowns in birth and how a baby comes in the world. We know like some things, but I don't think we know everything. And I think that's okay. It's okay to have a mystery there. And there is like so many unknowns in death, we don't know everything involved in that either. And they want to do their best to control life, so they're going to try and do their best to control death, as though if they don't control life and they don't control death, they see that somehow as a failure, I guess, in their view,
Yeah.
with that narcissistic attitude that is seen throughout the whole system.
Yeah.
I'm not saying necessarily they are themselves, but just the system itself is seen as that major savior God complex in life and in death, right?
Mm.
So I had some early losses after that. Those were sad. I felt like every loss after that just got worse. And just, I don't know, just the circumstances that kind of happened around those losses. I had a couple losses there at 6 weeks. And then three losses between 4 and 6 weeks. And then I had my last second trimester loss at 14 weeks. And this was the one that I was sure I was going to try and do myself. I got some herbs, but when the bleeding started, it was too much. I was having too many flashbacks. I was still grieving my other ones. I was having panic attacks where I couldn't breathe. It was just too much. So I decided to go in and do a D&C with my last one. And I do regret it, but at the time, I think it's what I needed to kind of help move forward a little bit. All three of my little guys are buried, so we have that there.
Mm.
And then my 19-month-old that I have, he was my redemptive birth. He was the one that I chose to do my own prenatal care. It was rough though, I have to say, because after so many losses, between when I had lost my baby between pregnancy 3 and 4, like that was a wake up call to show me, the innocence of pregnancy was kind of lost. It wasn't just like, oh, like, I'm pregnant and baby's gonna stay here for 9 months kind of thing, that innocence that nothing's gonna happen. And then so when that happened, I knew like the innocence was lost. So I always kind of had that, okay, what if in the back of my mind. But after having so many consecutive losses, it was definitely more of a what if. It was a lot of grieving still, a lot of ugly crying, a lot of questioning my own ability. It was kind of like definitely like a tearing down and a building up of like who I was and becoming a different person. In between my losses, I had taken a course with a wise woman, because I said in my heart, like, if I'm going to be done with the system, I don't feel like other women should have to go through what I went through at all. There needs to be something different. You can't change the system from within. So I had worked one on one with a wise woman throughout all of this. And that's when I chose to be a traditional birth attendant. It's funny because I knew when I was growing up, midwifery was something that I always wanted to do. But like I had said at the beginning, when I saw the OB care, I was like, no, I don't want any part of that. But there was still part of me that I always loved birth, loved being with women, loved hearing stories and seeing how birth has changed women and become the mothers they're meant to be. So I had had that background behind me when I was going through my pregnancy. And of course, near the end, there was lots of fears. I had felt him at one point near the end where he was, and I felt just this little nub, like it wasn't his head. I knew he was head down, but there was something else there. So I knew in the back of my mind, like, okay, could be a shoulder, could be a hand, could be an elbow, something was there. He wasn't quite where he was supposed to be. I say that in quotes,
Right.
right? So 2 days before he was born, my little girl came inside and I was giving her a haircut and she passed out and she was unresponsive. And we ended up calling 911, took her to the hospital. I was a wreck being 42 weeks pregnant, ready to give birth anytime. And this is going on. And they gave her a shot of Ativan. She came to. They did some scans and tests. We don't really know to this day what happened. But she was there overnight. And the whole time when I was overnight with her in the hospital, I was having contractions. And I
Oh, no.
remember praying, like, Lord, I am not going to have this baby here. I will walk outside the hospital and birth just outside these doors if I have to. I was just, oh man. So yeah, it was on and off again, contractions, those 2 days. And then that night, of course, there was no sleep, right? Being in the hospital. So when we brought her home that following night, uh, my contractions started like hardcore. They're really intense. I thought, wow, this is great. Like I got everything set up. My husband was helping me. And then in the morning, everything pittered out. It's like, hmm, something's off. So I tried to do some different position changes, like lunges and on my ball and different spinning babies to try and get, things started. And things kind of started off and on, but not as intense. And then that night, yeah, that night they started really intense. And then my water broke around 5, 6-ish. And there was meconium. And I sat with that, but I thought, I can still feel him moving. He's okay. Which shows that he can poop. He can
Mm-hmm.
poop. That's great. I don't have to worry about that when he comes out.
Right. Check.
So, yeah, so it took a long time because normally for me, when the time the baby's water breaks, like they're delivered, within a half, 2 hours normally. 2 hours went by, no baby. And I was kind of getting nervous. It's like, okay, like this was my time schedule. Like I know, I know how I labor, right? And I was still kind of in that, I don't know, in that moment, I guess, of, the set time, like this baby has to come out in the set time, like that mindset of, which I know now, like, it's not necessarily true. So I finally had to zone out and get kind of into out of my head. That's where I was. And I just was getting close because I was getting exhausted and I was just feeling done with the whole thing. And at that time I said to my husband, I was like, okay, this is not working. Like it's now 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I've been laboring all night, almost all day. Like, let's just go to the hospital. Let's just call it quits. And he's like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. And he started praying. And as soon as he prayed, Hail Mary, my rest of my water broke and I dropped to my knees. And he came. Placenta came within 20 minutes. No issue. Yeah, it was just so beautiful and redemptive. I say I started this pregnancy on my knees and I ended this pregnancy on my knees. It was just such a humbling experience. And just to finally have a birth without any regrets, without having to fight with anyone, without strangers poking at you and telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing, interrupting you. Like it was amazing. Like it was so wonderful.
I'm so happy for you. I'm sitting over here with goosebumps and all excited and that you finally got that birth, that redemptive birth, that supernatural birth, it feels like. That's incredible. So, so, so happy for you. And you said, now was that last one a boy or a girl?
It was a boy.
A
Yes,
boy. And so he's 19 months old now, you said?
he is. He's 19 months. Yeah.
Oh, that's sweet. I'm just curious, what are the spacings of the eight? How, like, what I get, or maybe you can just tell us what their ages are now, and that'll give us an idea of the spacings between them.
Yeah. So 13, 12, 11, 10, 8, 6, 5, and 19 months.
Oh, have they been just loving having the baby around? And
Yes, it's so different. I mean, loss definitely affected them. Having children go through losing siblings, as a whole dimension, because it's not just, your grief you have to be mindful of, it's also them. Lots of conversations and throughout it all. And yeah, they have definitely I don't know, a love for their little brother that I haven't seen with their other siblings.
mm-hmm.
He's just special, spoiled
Yeah,
by their older ones, right?
right.
Yeah.
Of course he is. Were any of them there for the birth, or was it just you and your husband?
They were at home, yeah, but they weren't in the bedroom. No, I had them in our bedroom, and my oldest wanted to come, but my husband he locked the door to make sure I wasn't going to be interrupted. Like, no, we're gonna guard our space, guard our hormones. And I appreciate that,
Yeah.
I do.
Mm.
Yeah.
What a story, Melissa. What a story. I'm so just happy that you got to have that experience.
Thank you.
Through all of that, what do you feel like God taught you the most?
I would say through it all, humility, nothing can be controlled. The only thing we can control is ourselves. You can't control birth. You can't control the outcome. You can't control death. It just brings up an extra layer of trust and faith that was never there before. I think having a wild pregnancy adds a dimension to that. I always wanted, kids that are, raised naturally and without that, but seeing that it starts in the womb. You are the mother, you are the parent, the authority of this child from the beginning. And whether the baby is a stillbirth or whether the baby grows up, and does great things like that, that's out of our control. And it's a humbling experience. Even in a wild pregnancy, I had no idea whether things were going to turn out okay or things were not going to turn out okay. And I had to come to that. I had to be okay with that. I had to come to that realization that I have no guarantees in life. I have no guarantees that this baby is going to come out alive. I have no guarantees that I'm not going to have to bury a child even later on in life.
Yeah.
There's no guarantees. And I think that just brought a deeper trust and a sense of humility. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, thank you. Thank you for everything, for sharing everything. Is there anything else you wanted to share before we end?
If you're looking for more support in your pregnancy, I have a Facebook group of Christian women who have free birthed and women who are looking to free birth.
And what's the name of the group?
It's called Empowered Christian Free Birth.
Beautiful. And I can link that in the show notes if anyone's interested in looking at that group. Well, I think that's wonderful that you have created a space for community of women who are on, a similar journey in terms of wanting to, have a faith-led free birth. So that's beautiful. And I'm glad that you're able to share your story with them, as I'm sure they're all able to share stories with each other. So that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You can reach me at Surrendered Birth Services on Instagram or email me at contact@surrenderedbirthservices.com. Be sure not to miss an episode by hitting the follow button. Also, we'd love for you to leave a written review of the show so that more people's births and lives can be changed by the love of Jesus and the empowerment of accurate birth education. If you really enjoyed this episode in particular, please take a screenshot of it and post it to your Instagram story, tagging Surrendered Birth Services. If you would like to be a guest on the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, please click the link in the episode show notes to fill out your interest form. Also, if you're interested in taking my childbirth classes, birth consultations, or having me as your birth doula, please click on the link in the show notes to take you to my website for online and in-person options. Just as a reminder, this show is not giving medical advice, so please continue to see your personal care provider as needs arise. We hope you have a great week, and remember, learn all that you can, make the best plans, and then leave it in God's hands.